Ciao tutti. It's wonderful to be here and wonderful to work with leaders at a local level and an international global level. Although worlds may be different, there is one universal common pattern that I've been exploring, and it is about leadership growth. I've been noticing that there is a tug of war, there's a tension, there's a dynamic happening between leading and learning. But first, I want to start with leadership, and a leader that I admire and I've learned from, my father. My father is amongst one of these male leaders in this picture, and he is one of two Asian Americans in this picture. There is also one female in this picture. This picture was taken in the mid-1960s. The United States had and still has a number of exclusionary acts against immigrants. But my father, during the mid-1960s, was able to journey from China, Hong Kong, all the way to the United States to be part of a study in the seminary school for a Master's of Divinity and a PhD in psychology. In Los Angeles, he created and founded a church for Chinese immigrants, where immigrants could gather together in their own language with people who shared the similar cultures and share in their faith. Recently, we celebrated the 50th anniversary, and here's a photo of my family, my sisters, my mother, and I. And one of the things that I feel very honorable about my dad is his humble servant leadership. So leaders are designed in different ways, and what I learned from my father was to be a leader, he had humility, and he served. So recently, a lot of times when we think about leaders, we know that training is really important. And so one thing that was really unconventional and a little different, a little crazy, is that after almost 2 decades of working as an educational leader, I went back into full-time school. So this past fall, I joined a group of 25 colleagues from all over the United States. They're all educational leaders, principals, community organizers, nonprofit leaders, for-profit leaders, innovators. And together we have 369 years as education leaders. Because our goal is to transform U.S. education in the PK-12 sector, we believe that it's important to take a pause and take time to invest in our leadership so that we can impact leadership in a greater way. San Francisco, that's where I've been for almost the past decade as a principal and also a leader of principals. San Francisco is a beautiful city, but we still have challenges in our schools, like many other areas in this world. I was able to visit 1,000 classrooms and support the leadership of school leaders. I supervised an organization of leaders. There were 56,000 students in San Francisco, and we wanted to ensure that we had high quality teaching and learning in every classroom. But challenges still exist, and there is an opportunity gap that widens based on race and class. For example, in one school, there is still only 12% who are proficient in English language arts, and 19%, that's 2 out of 10 students proficient in math. And so with that question, education leaders, we felt that it was important to take a pause and go back into full-time learning. The opportunity gap is not just for kids and students and youth. The opportunity gap exists for leaders and adults. So here's some data that I received, and I often talk about this with Adriana, one of my colleagues who was a principal in San Diego. She is Mexican American, and I am Chinese American. And there's a 98% and there's a 2%. So what do those numbers mean? Well, sadly enough, 2% represents the women of color, that's me and Adriana, who are in the top leadership positions of school systems. 98% of our superintendents of California are not women of color. Most of our top leadership still belong to men, hence the blue male figure, and behind them, supporting men, are women. So that raised a question of the importance of going back into investing in our leadership and becoming leaders. But what I want to say is, honestly, this difference, this transition between leaders and learners were very hard for us. So it wasn't until December where we finally were able to embrace ourselves as learners. After so many years of being leaders, we were so used to working and thinking and acting as leaders, but it wasn't until December, the end of the semester, we started exploring the ideas as ourselves as learners, saying that we are here to learn. And we wanted to reimagine and rethink education. So we went in search of different innovative schools, and we landed with Big Picture Learning in Rhode Island. Through that connection, we were able to connect with Biella in Italy. And last January, we came and we were invited to speak as experts and leaders in the future of learning. This was a successful collaboration of educators, entrepreneurs, and innovators in Biella. But honestly, while I was talking with our colleagues, we struggled. We struggled because half of my colleagues said, Bonnie, we're going to Biella because we want to be learners. We want to learn from the community. We heard there were great things happening at the schools. We want to see what's going on. And the Biella school said, this group is from Harvard. We want them to lead. We want them to show us what the future of learning is going to be about. So we had a sort of tension, which I call the tug of war. What I realize is that sometimes we think of leadership and learning as a dichotomy, a leader or a learner. And so there's this tug of war that's happening between leadership and learning. So how many have you played this tug of war game? Maybe when you were little. Tug of war is a game with a rope, and one side tries to pull that rope over, and another side tries to pull the rope to this side. So there's always, in this game, going back and forth until one side finally wins. And I was thinking that's often how we think about leadership and learning. We think of leaders as being the stars and tellers of information and skills. We think of learners as being students who are just absorbing and learning information and skills. So I want to propose that if we really want to have leadership growth, we have to think about the sweet spot of leadership growth. And that happens when, in the tug of war, there's a rope, and there's an equal pull from the leadership side, and there's an equal pull from the learners. We're always going to have a bit of tension going both ways. But when you find that sweet spot, that equilibrium, that balance, that's where I believe that leadership growth happens. So how do we find that sweet spot of leadership growth? That sweet spot for learning and leadership? Train your eyes to see differently. So when you train your eyes to see differently, you're actually training your mind to think differently. When you train your mind to think differently, you are training yourself to act differently. Here's an example of how we can train our eyes to see differently. So if we take a look at this photo, there are individuals climbing up the mountain. And there are some that are already up there. When we look at a picture like this, very often we start thinking the people at the top are the leaders. But what if we saw this differently? What if we trained our eyes to see differently? What if the person on the bottom is actually the leader? And what if he was telling everyone what to do and how to do it and showing them and encouraging from the bottom, and at the very end, those members of his organization were actually leading him and learning how to be leaders? So train your eyes to think differently. Here's another example. This is a photo of a baby. Baby Aniela is a niece of mine who was born in Poland 2 Decembers ago. She had a condition called Edwards syndrome, which is trisomy 18. That gives an extra chromosome 18 when you're being developed during the 6th month when someone is pregnant. Your vital organs stop developing fully. So the medical team had said that Aniela would never survive. Aniela would never be born. They were saying death on Aniela. And we kept on hoping and persisting that Aniela would survive. We wanted her to live. And so I'm going to say that Aniela is a leader, because although she did pass away just 5 months, less than 5 months of her life, she encouraged people. She brought people together. She changed mindsets. She helped me to pray like I've never prayed before for an extra breath every day for her. And she was able to be victorious over operations, over surgeries that she should not have been victorious over. She brought communities together, and she changed the way that I thought and I lived. I never would have thought I would have a peace, I would have an understanding, I would have an inner joy for those almost 5 months that I had with Aniela. So if Aniela was able to change mindsets and practices of people, I believe that students can be seen as leaders, and they are leaders. Which ways do we stop and inhibit students from being the future and our leaders presently? We think of students as learners. When they get older, they're going to be leaders. But what if we switched our thinking and we saw students as leaders? Parents, aunts, uncles, grandmothers, grandfathers, teachers, principals. We need to start thinking as students, being leaders now, and giving them opportunities to be involved in leadership and to make change in this world. Leaders, I know there are a variety of leaders here that are here today to learn more about how to be more effective. So leaders, I ask that you look at your organizations and think about your organization as a way to help people to learn. When we learn more about our skills, ourselves, we can have a greater impact in our workplace and in this world. So the future of organizations is the growth of the people in them. So last but not least, I'm going to ask you to join me today. Take some time to think about yourselves. This tug of war dynamic, do you see yourself as a leader, or do you see yourself as a learner? Do you see yourself as both? Maybe you're not sure. But I want to ask you to join me today, and I'm going to ask you to stand up right now. Por favor, alzame. And if you consider yourself a leader, I challenge you and I ask you to think about ways to learn and grow yourself and be a model of learning and make your organization a learning organization for every member of your organization. And if you consider yourself a learner, I encourage you to step into leadership. Not step in like this, step into leadership. I want you to step into leadership because you have so much knowledge, you have so much experience, and it's time for you to share it. That's all leadership is sharing yourself and your ideas and your passions and skills with others. So my last message to you is this. Oops. Learn and lead with love. Grazie.